Everybody's doing great out there. Today we're going to be talking about the USG Flex H, which was just released last week. We here at Zyxel are very, very excited about this firewall because it is the most powerful firewall that we've made to date. So in talking about the firewall itself, we want to look at the GUI because the GUI is going to be a lot different from what you're normally used to. And that's mainly because we've implemented a new operating system for our USG Flex H series. So to begin, let's talk about the USG Flex H. As it was released last week, it's basically the first iteration of the OS that has been released to the firewalls. And because of this, there are going to be some features that are missing. So I want to preface this by going over all of the different features that are going to be available sometime next year. So let's talk about feature enhancements first for the USG Flex H series. So right now, as of the current firmware 1.10, there are some features that are actually missing because they will be implemented later on in the future. So starting from the list, we have secure Wi-Fi and AP management. Those features are not currently available right now. However, if you're going to be managing your access points, you can do so in Nebula because the firewall can integrate within Nebula, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So secure Wi-Fi and AP management will be added in Q2 of 2024. Additionally, our ingress and egress bandwidth settings are not available right now. And the reason for that is because it has to tie in with the load balancing algorithms, and there are some load balancing algorithms that are not available. So from right now, you will not be able to set the actual bandwidth for the upstream and downstream for the WAN settings. Moving also along, we also have the WAN MAC address cloning option. So in the older USGs, the Flexes, the ATPs, the older USG 310s, 210s, there was an ability in the WAN settings to clone the MAC address of a modem. So if you were swapping out a firewall with a modem that was already in place, there was an option to create a clone of the MAC address instead of having to reboot the modem or power off the modem for 3 to 5 minutes to clear the settings of the old device that was there. So basically the WAN clone MAC address option is not available, and it will be available next year. Link aggregation, we will support link aggregation on both the WAN and the LAN of the USG Flex H series, and that will be next year in Q2 of 2024. Now, going back to the egress and ingress bandwidth settings, we do have load balancing algorithms, but right now we only support weighted round robin. Basically, with weighted round robin, it looks at the different settings for your WAN ports, and it will divvy up the packets accordingly based off the WAN speed. What we do not support right now is spillover and least load first. And these type of load balancing algorithms are most likely found when you have usually an active-passive connection. So with least load first and spillover, what you can end up doing is with the load balancing algorithm, specifically we'll talk about spillover really quick, is that you can set up your primary and secondary WAN ports, WAN port 1 and WAN port 2. And then basically WAN port 2 will not activate until WAN port 1 has capped out its bandwidth, and it will spill over any additional bandwidth over to the secondary WAN port. So that feature is not available right now. And then also least load first, which was the default load balancing algorithm setting on our firewalls, which basically looks at both WAN ports and then decides which WAN port is under the least amount of load before sending traffic across. So those two algorithms will be supported next year. In terms of IPsec, we do support IPsec. However, IPsec policy routing will not be available from the start, along with VPN failover. So with VPN failover, you will not be able to switch over from WAN port 1 to WAN port 2. If your WAN port 1 fails, the VPN will not transition over to WAN port 2 to reestablish the VPN. So that's something that will be coming next year as well. Another thing is going to be bandwidth management. So right now, bandwidth management rules are not available. So if you have to set up any type of rules with bandwidth management, you may need to do it either on your switch or your access point level for the time being if you're going to be using the USG Flex H series. Captive portal will be supported next year. There's going to be some enhancements to our captive portal, and they will be followed into the later firmware that will come out next year to support the captive portal. Session control. So session control is unavailable right now. So what session control basically means is the ability to limit the amount of sessions per host. So this means that you will not be able to set, say, your sessions per host down to 2,000 sessions per device. So right now, the session control option is not going to be available until next year. Moving along, the last three options are going to be email alerts. So email alerts right now are not available. So you still get your basic logging on the firewall, and you can set up with an external logging server. That does exist, so you can do syslogs, but you will not get email alerts as of right now. Web console is not available. So previously on other firewall models, we did have an option to enable the web console to see, basically to get back in with SSH through the web console. So that's not available until next year. And then finally, the AD server authentication is absent as of right now. So these are all the features that will be coming next year. However, it still will function as a firewall. They're still going to have the same functions that you'd see on the other devices, our ATP and our Flex series, minus these specific features. Now let's talk about the GUI itself. And before I transition over to the GUI, I want to talk a little bit about how this device is onboarded. Now with the Flex H series, it's going to be very similar, if not better, than the actual Flex series and then also the ATP series. You have two options when it comes to management of the firewall. You can manage the device in standalone mode, or you can manage it in the cloud. What we've done right now with the cloud mode is we've implemented the cloud monitoring mode that you see on the USG Flex and ATP series. So the cloud monitoring mode allows you to onboard your firewall into your Nebula account, and then by clicking on a remote access configurator button, it creates a tunnel within Nebula to give you access to your full GUI interface of the firewall, as if you were actually on site. So as of right now, that's the Nebula integration when it comes to our USG Flex H series. So I'm going to switch over to the USG Flex H that's currently in Nebula. So you should see on my screen right here. Continue. So you should be able to see my screen with the Nebula account. So I have a firewall only in this particular account right now because I have to have a Pro Pack in order to access this specific feature. So if I click on the firewall, it will take me to the actual firewall page itself. And this is very similar to what you would see is if you had a USG Flex or ATP series in Nebula. Okay, so we can see the serial number, we can see the MAC address, we can see the firmware availability in the latest version. So when it's tied to Nebula, you can update your firmware, you can update your configurations, and you can also back up your configurations directly to the cloud, meaning that there's an actual backup that's saved within the cloud, and then you can push specific backups back to your particular units. Now you'll see up here we have remote configurator. So if I click on remote configurator, there's an option for establish, and this will create a virtual link to your firewall. So you no longer have to expose your external IP address for your firewall to get access to it remotely. It can all be done within Nebula. So here, if I click on this, it's going to open up a new page or a new tab that will bring up the actual GUI interface for me to log into. Now, it does take a couple moments because it is establishing the link. And then here we go. Here's our login page. So if I type in admin, and then I type in my password, it'll give us full access to the GUI. And so here is our USG Flex H GUI that's going to be standardized across all of our firewall devices. Now, what you'll see immediately is that this looks like Nebula, and that is 100% intentional, because the idea here with all of our Flex H devices is that Nebula will eventually look exactly like this when you go to configure it. So that means that when you go to fully integrate your firewall into Nebula in the future, everything that you see here on the GUI page, as if you were in standalone, will be mirrored directly into Nebula. So there's not going to be this situation where Nebula's missing features where standalone has all the specific features that you need. It's going to be an exact one-to-one replica of every single setting that you see in standalone will be mirrored directly to the cloud. And in doing so, this also gives us the ability to have one specific configuration in one specific firmware that can be used across both standalone and in Nebula Cloud. So that basically means that if you need to go from cloud to standalone and vice versa, your configuration will be usable between both instances. So there's no need for you to wipe the configuration in the future. If you need to go from one version of standalone to cloud, you could still keep your same configuration files, and then the firmwares will be the exact same. So now there's this unified operating system that will work between both Nebula and standalone. So if you're looking at the dashboard here, it's going to look exactly like you would see in standalone mode. Your system information, your virtual devices, resources, everything is here on your dashboard. What we've done is we've actually taken all of the configurations and all of the different options within the GUI, and we've grouped them together. So up at the top, you have your dashboard, you have your system information, and then you have things like security. So under your security tab, when you have your licenses enabled, you'll be able to see all of your security services at a glance. So you'll be able to see all of your top applications, you'll be able to see your threat indicators. So all of this is going to be at the very top. Additionally, we do have an option for favorites because as you see, as you click down into specific things, you can star things as a favorite. So your most used options or your most used configuration panels, you can then be able to go back to them quickly in your favorites menu bar. So again, this will also be translated into Nebula in the future. Here we have a group of statistics. So all of your system statistics for your ports, your interfaces, and then your resources will be all located under this tree heading. And then we have more in-depth security statistics. So here we have our security overview, but then we have our statistics for each and every one of our services that you would use for licensing. So your app patrol, content filtering, reputation filtering, IPS, anti-malware, sandboxing, and SSL inspection. So if you want to get statistics on any of these security services and get an in-depth view of them individually, they'll be all located under the security statistics. Here we have our network status. So we can view the monitor of specific things. So we have our interface statistics, our session monitor, device insight, where we can see the devices that are connected, devices that are logged in, and then also the DHCP table. And then finally, your VPN status. So these items here were previously located under the monitor tab in standalone, but now we've kind of grouped them here under the second heading or the second tree heading on the menu on the left. Now here is going to be your main settings here. We have our licensing, where you can update your licenses and then also update your signatures. So signature update, you would just come here, and then you'll see that the signature was up to date or as of 2 days ago for these two, and then today for the IP reputation. So we have our actions, so you can update manually, or you can set it to a schedule, just like you did in the GUI of the older ATP and Flex series. Now let's take a look at network really quick. So under network, this is going to be where you do your interfaces. If you click on interface, you'll find that it looks a little bit like Nebula did. So we have our external and we have our internal interfaces, very similar to how it is on the GUI of Nebula. So here you would set your external interfaces, and then down here will be your internal interfaces. So this is where you would add your LANs or your VLANs. So if you wanted to add another LAN port, you would just click on add, and it will load up the page. And then here you can choose the name, what port it's bound to, any of the ports, P1, P2, P3, so on and so forth. Choose the zone, and then give it a description, and then choose if you want to use a fixed IP address or if you want to do DHCP. Now, anytime you make a change, you would have to click on apply at the very bottom, very similar to how it is in Nebula. However, if you made a mistake or you just want to get out of it, you can click reset, and it resets it back to this default here to allow you to re-enter the information in. Okay. Now, one of the things that I want to point out here when it comes to the Flex H series is that if you remember with the older USG series, the ATP and the Flex, the lower models, like the 50s, the 100s, the 200s, the lower end models, the WAN ports and the LAN ports were specifically bound to certain interfaces. We've gotten a lot of feedback from our customers, and we've now changed it so that all the ports on any of the models can now be configured to any port. So if you want to have multiple WAN ports, you can do that. If you want to have multiple LAN ports, that is completely 100% configurable for every single port on the firewall, regardless of the model that you have. So this is going to be a huge departure from our older series where the 100s and the 200s were specifically bound to a certain interface in a certain WAN or LAN zone. Now you have the flexibility to be able to choose which ports belong to which interfaces. All right. Now, under interfaces, we have our routing where you can create any type of policy routes and then all of your static routes as well. It's created the same way that you would in the regular firewalls or ATPs and Flexes. You would just click on Add, and you would go in and fill in your information, your source address, destination address, so on and so forth. What we've also done here is if you click on a service, you want to create a new service, just like in the older firewalls, you can add an object or add a group. And then you have all of your built-in services that are already here that you can choose from. So works pretty much the same way as it does in the older firewall series. NAT, of course, we can do a virtual server for your port forwarding or a one-to-one NAT. So this is going to be the exact same setup that you would see on the Flex and ATP series. Application level gateway, same thing. It's going to have the exact same configuration settings that you would see on the older firewalls. Next up, if we take a look at our VPNs, we do support IPsec and SSL VPN. So when it comes to IPsec VPN, you can create your own IPsec VPN tunnel, or you can do a remote access VPN. So with the remote access VPN, you do have a couple of settings. This is going to be your client to site VPN. And we have links directly to get the actual software to interface with the remote VPN. So if you want to get the Set to Extender VPN software for Windows, you can click on this. Or if you want to get it for Mac, it leads you directly to get the specific OS. Now, if you want to do it for specific client devices that are mobile, we do have VPN scripts that can be downloaded to devices so that it'll automatically provision and configure the VPN. So this is an option that we're going to be adding here shortly. It's already in here, but once you've created it, I believe this should come active, but you'll be able to download the iOS and Mac OS script and then also the Android script that uses Strong Swan VPN. So this is going to be your setup for your VPN, and you'll see that L2TP over IPsec is not listed in here. And that's one of the things that is actually not supported as of right now. Okay. Next up, we have our security policy. So your security policy is going to be where you set your firewall rules. Now you'll see here by default, we have slimmed down the default rules, and now we're down to 7 default rules specific to the Firewall Flex H. We have all of our exceptions, and then we have at the very bottom our catch-all rule, our deny, our master rule that denies everything. So everything above it is going to be your things that you're allowing, and then everything beneath it at the bottom is going to be your deny. So in the prior firewall models, this list, the default list, was much larger, so we did shrink this down to make it less confusing for our customers. You can delete things if you need. If you're not going to use IPsec, you can get rid of it, or you can inactivate the rule. But we have cleaned this up a lot more than what we had in the past. An option here is we have DOS prevention. So you have a DOS denial of service attack prevention on the WAN port, and we have a specific anomaly profile that is associated with it. So using our anomaly detection, we can see all the traffic that's hitting the WAN, and then we can make a decision on how we handle that particular anomaly, and it usually just ends up dropping the connection. Okay. Now, next we have our objects. So again, this is still an object-oriented firewall. So we can create address objects, service objects, zone objects, and we can also create a schedule for specific things. So we have a schedule object option, like we saw in the previous firewalls, that allows us to create a specific schedule, and then we can apply these schedules to different things like a policy route or static route or a firewall rule. So that's still in play and is still available on the Flex H series. Next up, let's take a look at the security services that are available. So just like in the older series, we have application control, content filtering, which these pretty much go hand in hand with each other. Your app patrol is going to monitor applications on the network, such as Hulu, Netflix, Facebook, apps that are on phones and tablets, whereas content filtering handles all of your web-based traffic. We have our reputation filter. We'll look at traffic that's going to specific sites and IPs based on a reputation list to see if that particular IP address is legit or not. We have our anti-malware, again, which will scan traffic to see if the traffic being downloaded through the device is malicious or suspicious. Of course, we have our sandboxing, where we can take a proactive measure in taking unknown threats to have them analyzed in the cloud to determine what they are. We have our IPS here. That's going to be our, looking at the traffic coming in and seeing if there's any anomalies coming in from the LAN port. Our IP exception is if you want to exempt specific devices from certain services. So if you want to, say, prevent a phone from being scanned because it's only connecting to a specific IP address, or if you have an important CEO, an important CEO or important employee that requires or requests full access without being scanned, you can set that up as well. And then finally, we have our basic SSL inspection, which will require our SSL agent along with the certificate installed on different devices. All right, moving along here, we have user authentication. So with user authentication, Active Directory is not available as of right now. So even though we have AAA server here, the only thing we support right now is Radius. So eventually next year, we will have the option to support your Active Directory. So if you want to do Active Directory for your authentication for different things, that will be an option that will be available in the future. Next up, we have our system settings. So we have our logging options that comes down here, but for our system settings, we have basically things like what's the host name, what's the sync time for the NTP, if you want to use the NTP pool to sync your time zones. We have all of that stuff as well. And then, of course, by default, we have our administrative settings, which is basically how you access the device locally. This doesn't have any effect on your external connection using the Nebula portal to access the device. This is all just local settings. So if you're local to the device, you can change the login port from 443 to any other port you choose. And then we also have our redirect. So if you hit port 80, it'll automatically redirect to 443. You can disable that if you wish, but these are the basic settings for the firewall itself. SNMP, so if you want to use SNMP to link up to the firewall, this is going to be your SNMP settings where you can enter in that information. If you want to have a dying DNS account or DDNS account to link to the host name of the firewall, you could set that up with your DDNS here. So the different profiles that we support, you'll see here if we actually try to add one, we have dying DNS, we have no IP, or if you have one that's on the list that's not on the list here, you could put user customization, and then you put the username and password, and then the domain that it belongs to. Now, going back to the actual DNS settings itself, you can go back and change your DNS settings. So if you want to use your own address record or CNAME or MX records, you can do that as well. And then we have our domain zone forwarder as well if you want to add that in as well. So you can enter your own DNS settings if you wish, or you can use your own, put your information in here. Now for notifications. So we have notifications this is not specifically for the logging, it's just notifications for the device itself. So this is a little bit different. Eventually you will be able to actually set up log emails, but this is specifically notifications for the device itself. you need to add a certificate to the unit, you can by entering in your own certificate here. There is a self-signed certificate that comes default with the device, but if you want to enter in your own, you have the ability to do so here. Now, log and report. Like I said, we do support regular basic logs, and the logs pretty much look the same as they did in the previous firewall generation. So if we look at log events, as it comes up, it takes a second to pull all the information. Your log events is going to show you all the different logging events that have happened, and it's going to be listed out in a table. Let me click out and go back in. There we go. So here's our log event. So you'll see that the logs look exactly like they did in the previous firewall generation. So your logs, basically you can have, we've expanded out the actual amount of logs that can be handled by the device itself. So previously, in previous generation firewalls, the amount of logs that were retained on the device was about 500. We've now expanded that out to 2,048 log entries before they get overwritten. So we've increased that out so that people can catch specific logs if they need to. And we still support syslog server, so you can have this dumped out to a syslog server as well. So for doing that, you would set that up in the log settings. You can choose your system log, or if you want to do it to USB storage or remote server. So remote server is going to be where you set up your syslog server. So if you have a cloud-based syslog server account, or you have your own syslog server locally, you can have all the logs sent specifically to the syslog servers. Security Reporter is also available to use to have your logs sent. So Security Reporter is our cloud-based reporting software. It's going to support all of the security events and network applications and interface status, along with your log traffic. So you can have it sent to our cloud-based reporter. So Security Reporter will take all this information and make it in a more readable format so that you can read it and easily digest the information instead of having to go through each log, line by line to figure out what's been going on. All right. So email daily report, and even though it's here, we do have the option to send up the whole log for the daily report, but we just can't send out log alerts. So basically, you can do a report of the whole day of your logs, but we can't do log alerts right now. So basically meaning that if the interface goes down and you want to send out an email, it won't send out an email because we don't have that option available right now. All right, finally, under our maintenance. So this is going to be where you do your file manager and your diagnostics and your reboot and shutdown. So file manager is going to be where all of your configuration files are stored. And now if you've seen this compared to the previous versions, you'll notice that we've condensed this down and removed a lot of configurations that were in there. So the only two configurations that are available now is your startup config, which is going to be your current configuration. So anytime you make a change, it is copied to the startup configuration file. And then you have your last good configuration file. So your last good is always going to be anytime you do a reboot, it goes through everything line by line. And if it does boot up all the way, then it will make a copy of the current running configuration as the last good configuration. And you'll notice that the default configuration is no longer visible. It's basically hidden. So anytime you do a factory default or you need to factory default the device, it'll automatically load that configuration file, but it's no longer visible in the file manager. Now, when it comes to firmware management, we've gone away with the visible two partition solution. Now there's just one partition that runs. And then so if you need to do a firmware upgrade, you just come down here and hit the check now button to see if there is a new firmware available. And if there is a new firmware available, it will list it here, and then you'll be able to actually do a cloud-based, or you can do a localized-based upload from pulling the configuration from the website. So those are your options. Now, as best practice, we always suggest that you have it set to check every day. So you can have it check and then have it automatically update, or you can have it auto reboot once the firmware has been downloaded. Now, we do support some basic diagnostics that we saw in the previous firmware versions. So we have our diagnostics page where you can collect statistics for the device or do a diagnostic file collection. This is often used by tech support or our engineers whenever there's an issue that needs to be resolved. We can look at the diagnostics of all of the different processes that are running to find out what's going on. We do support packet captures like we did in our previous version. So you can do a packet capture from any specific interface, and you can choose the length of the packet capture in terms of the amount of storage that you set aside. So you can do, your file size up to 10 megs, or you can split it up, but you can choose how you set up your packet capture. And then here's some more information in terms of CPU status. So we can look at all 4 CPUs, the 4 cores of the CPUs on this particular device and see which ones are under load. And then we can see what specific applications or what specific thing within the firewall, like your constant filtering, or if you notice that your CPU usage is high, we can come here and take a look at what application or what security service is causing the CPU to spike up. So this gives you a little bit more insight into the inner hardware as of what's going on in regards to the performance of the firewall. Of course, now we have our system logs, so you can choose to archive your system logs directly to a USB. Just like the previous versions, you won't be able to access the files on the USB until you take the USB storage out. So if you do opt for that method of having your logs stored to the USB, just know that you have to pull the USB out and connect it to a computer in order to be able to view those logs. Then we have our network tool. So if you want to do a NS lookup or you want to do a ping or trace route from the firewall, you can do that just in case there's some kind of problem going on. So it allows you to be able to see exactly, what the firewall is seeing. And then we also have a query server and then an extension option if you need to use that. And then finally, we just have our remote reboot and shut down. So if you need to reboot the device remotely, you can, or if you want to completely turn it off, you can. Okay. So that's the GUI overview for the USG Flex H. Again, this is going to be what the GUI for the Nebula interface will look like sometime next year, so that we have one-to-one and complete parity between the configurations for both the firewall in standalone mode and the firewall in cloud mode. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share, and I'm going to leave everything open, leave the floor open up for some questions, if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, we have a pretty active audience here. So for the first question, will ad server authentication be available for admin users of the firewall and not just VPN users and such?
So if you want to use admin users for localized login for authentication, yes, that will be supported in the future. Now, in terms of integration with going with Nebula as a Nebula account, no. It's just primarily for admin users that are local to the device. So when you log into the Nebula account and you bring up the GUI through Nebula, you can use Active Directory for admin accounts, yes, you will be able to. But tying it into Nebula as a login will not be a thing as of right now.
Great. All right, for our next question. Whose threat intelligence / security engines are being used on these new firewalls?
We're using the exact same ones that we were using previously. So our Trend Micro, our McAfee, we're using the exact same ones that we were using before.
Okay. Another question, are the favorites account specific or device specific?
The favorites on the device. So if you mean, you're talking about the favorites menu, is that what they're asking? When you favorite a specific menu, that's specific to the actual firewall because we're logged into the firewall and that favorite stays with the device. So anytime you mark something down as a favorite, it's going to be staying with the device. Now, in the future, when we have full integration with Nebula, I do believe that when you create favorites in the Nebula interface, it will be global for all devices under the organization.
Great, thank you. Okay, can we still add virtual interfaces?
Virtual interfaces will be added later on. I think that's something that was skipped on the slides, but there's no virtual interfaces as of right now.
Okay, next question. Is there native ACME /Let's and script support for generating SSL certificates for the web UI and VPN?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, is there native ACME like ACME/Let's and script support for generating SSL certificates?
As of right now, no. That's something that we'll have to see if that's going to be a feature enhancement, but as of right now, no, it is not supported.
Okay, is the log persisted? What's this? When the firewall is switched off? Not sure.
The logs will still, I think the question is if the logs will still, if the logs remain on the device.
Okay.
Yeah, the log, if you reboot the firewall, any logs that you had on the device will be wiped. However, in the future, when the device has full integration with Nebula, even if you reboot it, the clouds will hold the logs based off of what level of licensing you have. So, for instance, if you just have the base Nebula pack and you don't have the Pro pack, when the Flex H is integrated fully into Nebula, your logs will be saved up to 24 hours. If you get the Pro pack, your logs will be saved up to a year, regardless of if the device is rebooted or not.
Okay, next question, are the configuration files still editable?
That's a good question, yes. Excuse me. So yes, the configuration files are completely editable. What you'll find is that previously with the older generation firewalls, when you took a configuration file, that configuration file was pretty much specific to that particular device because there was a header in the config file that listed the firmware version and also the device name. Now, that's no longer the case. When you open up a config file for any of the USG Flex H series, you'll see that the configuration file, there's nothing that makes it specific to any device other than the GE ports that are available. So if, in theory, if you want to take the configuration file from like a USG Flex 200H and apply it to a 500H, as long as you are aware of the amount of the port differences in terms of how many ports are available, you can literally just take that file and take it from one config from one model to another model. So they've really simplified the configuration file and the commands for the device so that it makes exporting and importing configurations a lot easier. And also, that brings up another thing I do want to mention is that if you are using the CLI from the USG Flex and ATP series and the older USG series, the command line structure and command line nomenclature, everything has changed because we are on a completely different new OS. So you're going to want to take a look at the CLI guides on our website. Just go to any of the USG Flex H's on the downloads and take a look at the CLI guide because it's going to be a lot different from what you're used to. So if you're a person that likes to do CLI commands or likes to get in using CLI only, just be aware that the commands are completely different.
Okay, so I'm not sure what this means. Will this support HA?
Yes, it will. In the future, it will support device HA. That's going to be something for next year, Q2.
Great. Okay. Will these units allow for site-to-site SSL VPNs?
No, we only support site-to-site IPsec VPN.
Okay. Object FQDN option was not available in beta version. Is it available in the official release?
That's not going to be available until next year because that's one of the things that they let us know, that even though in the beta it wasn't available, but that's something that they are working on and it will be available next year.
We have so many questions. All right, since email alerts are a future enhancement, can we still do two-factor authentication for SSL VPNs via email?
I'll have to look into that, but I believe that is a yes.
Okay. All right. Will this new OS be backported for the USG Flex series like the Flex 500?
Oh, that's a good question. My understanding is the idea is that from eventually everything that we have will be on this new OS. Now, in terms of the older devices, I will have to check with our management team and our engineers to find out if they will make it available for the older units. But the idea moving forward is that we're going to have this unified operating system so that, you know, all of our access points, all of our switches, and all of our firewalls will have this exact same OS. So as far as them using it on the older versions, I will double check to see if that's going to be something they're working towards in the future.
Great, awesome. All right, is the config file from old Flex 500 will work on 500H?
No, you can't take the Flex and put it on a Flex 500H. Like the older ATPs or the older Flexes will not take the configuration file of. You won't be able to move the configuration file from one to the other. So as of right now, that's the unfortunate thing right now in terms of users who are, you know, vested in the older Flex 500s and the, you know, ATPs and whatnot. If they have the configuration, there's no way to migrate that config over to the new device.
Okay, moving along. Is there any reason right now to get the Flex over the Flex H?
Yeah, so right now, if you have a customer that needs a firewall and the features that I listed that are coming next year, if any of those devices or any of those features are a showstopper for that customer, then I would stick to the Flex series, the regular Flex series, mainly because there are some specific things that might be showstoppers for customers. So for instance, load balancing algorithms, let's just say that they have an ISP connection, like a cable ISP connection for WAN 1, and then their WAN 2 is an LTE modem, like a cradle point. And, you know, in this scenario, let's just say that that cradle point incurs extra fees for going over a specific bandwidth cap. Well, as of right now, because we have weighted round robin as the only load balancing algorithm, that basically means that that secondary WAN port, that LTE connection, is always going to remain active. It's just going to receive, you know, traffic based off of the amount of the algorithm choosing how much traffic to send through it. So it's not going to be an active passive connection, and that means that that LTE connection is always going to be live, and that means that you'll most likely incur overage fees with that particular ISP. So in that particular scenario, I would more lean towards the regular Flex series because of that particular missing feature. So I think it's going to be up to what the customer's needs are based off of what we currently support and the things that aren't supported now to make the decision if you want to use the Flex over the Flex H series.
Thank you, Marcus. That was a very detailed answer. Okay, next, will there be full Nebula integration in the future?
Yes. So the target date, it will be sometime of November next year. So pretty much a year from now is the target date to have full Nebula integration, to where, you know, the Nebula interface and the Flex H series have the exact same GUI, and the configurations will be movable between both the standalone and in Nebula. So we're looking for November of 2024.
Great. All right. So the next question, will there be a configuration converter when going from a Flex to a Flex H?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that earlier, but yes, there is going to be an online configuration tool available in I believe April of next year. That will allow you to take an older Flex series, the configuration, drop it in, and have it converted over to the H series. So that is coming. It is in the works. It's not available right now, but it is coming.
Great. All right. Something to look forward to. Next question, can firmware be upgraded from the Nebula portal?
Yes, it can. So what you can do is if you log into your Nebula account, you'll see the Flex H, and then it will tell you if the firmware is up to date or not, and then you can push a firmware directly from the Nebula portal to the device, and also schedule the firmware update at your choosing.
All right. Okay. Follow up. There's a question here. Do you have any info on how the link aggregation will work? And follow up to that, will you be able to make two lags on the same VLAN and use them across multiple switches with spanning tree to create as much redundancy as you can?
We won't have that answer until we actually see the lag introduced. So we'll probably know sometime by early next year once we start getting some more information as to how that will be implemented. So as of right now, we just know that lag will be supported, but we won't know the specifics of how many lag interfaces you'll be able to create and then doing more advanced routing or advanced features with the lag. So sometime early next year, we'll have more of a clear picture of what that will entail.
Awesome. All right. Will any other older firewalls have a config conversion tool to the new H line?
Yeah, so just like the earlier question, we will have an online configuration converter utility roughly April of next year. In terms of what will be supported, I think it's only going to be the Flex and the ATP. They haven't said anything about the older like USG 310, 210s, 110s, but I would most likely bet on it just mainly being the ATP and the Flex series that you'll be able to convert it over.
All right, so I think that would be it, Marcus. No more, we don't have any more questions coming in. So I'd like to thank all our attendees and you, Marcus, for this very detailed webinar. And is there anything else you would like to add, Marcus, before we wrap it up?
Yeah, so, if you were part of the beta program, I would definitely suggest that you upgrade over to the official release whenever possible. If you have any problems doing so, you can contact our tech support department because they have an SOP on how to convert your beta over to the official version release. And then we're still going to have the exact same releases. We're going to have releases for both lines of firewalls. I know that we're kind of fragmented a bit, but we are still going to continue support for ATP and our Flex series. And then we're still going to be releasing firmware for both of those. And then while also improving and enhancing the Flex H series line.
Great. Thank you, Marcus, once again. And thank you to everybody. And we'll see you on our next webinar. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.